Good evening. I'm Rebecca Messner. Welcome to Biography. Tonight we present part one of the biography on Elizabeth Dowling Barnes Messner, my grandmother, from her birth in Arkansas through to the birth of her last child, Margaret Sue Messner. My grandma will tell the whole story in her own words. Elizabeth Dowling Barnes was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas on May 5, 1918. World War I was almost over, the automobile was becoming ubiquitous, and the Roaring Twenties were about to begin. Fayetteville was growing as a result of being home of the University of Arkansas, known simply as the University. Betty, as she was known, was the only child of her parents, Emma Burns and Bert Barnes. As Grandma notes, she did not grow up in a typical family environment, primarily due to the untimely death of her father when she was only 3.
My father was born in, as I think I've mentioned before, in Fruitport, Michigan, and had come down to Chicago to work and worked at Peacock's. I think that's where he got his training in jewelry and so forth. He was a fine engraver and artisan. And that's where he met my mother. He had one of the first cars in Fayetteville. And I remember with Junior, Walker was always so impressed with him, but he thought he was so fine and so kind and so considerate of a young boy. But also he had this great car, which was quite an asset. But apparently he was a very fine, wonderful, romantic, gentle man, and I'm just so sorry that I didn't know him. I still feel like he's looked after me all these years, however. But he developed diabetes, and it was just before insulin was discovered. And he went various places trying to seek medicinal help and so forth, and finally died at Natchez, Mississippi. Came into the church just before he died, and was buried from St. Joseph's in Fayetteville. He died on December the 1st, 1920. He was 38 years old. He was the same age as my husband's mother when she died. She was 38. So there was a great loss in both families. But Mother was quite a belle in her day, but then she proved to be a very caring, devoted mother, and supported herself and me, being left young with one child to support and no training in any field. And so my mother was left as a very young woman with me, and had gone to college, but had never graduated from college. And my grandfather was of the school that no daughter of his was going to have to work. So she was completely untrained, except as to be a delightful hostess, and which she was. And so at one point she'd been a member of Zeta Tau Alpha sorority in college, and so as a little girl, she went and was house mother for the Zetas, not too far from my grandmother's house where we had lived. And so I was there as a little girl in this lovely big old house that is still standing and still beautiful there, about 2-3 blocks from where my grandparents were. And so then from there she worked at the Boston store and did very well. And then she was asked to take over as director of the Women's Residence Hall. So that's where I grew up, really, was on the campus of the University of Arkansas. And to me, Cornell is my home, and I am so devoted to the university because it was a wonderful opportunity. It was like a family. I felt so close to the other people that were working for her and with her, and then there were several of the faculty that lived there because of the fact that it was depression, and the cotton crop had failed, and so the school was quite small. This was in like 1930. on to when I graduated in 1938. And as a result, you'd have marvelous dinner table conversations with Miss Galbraith, who was head of the art department, and somebody else who was head of the English department, and they would cite all these. Another Miss Yater would come over and bring me lists of books that I should be reading, you know, like Vanity Fair. I mean, not the abridged editions, but the real thing. And I would have, it was very stimulating, you know. And so I don't feel like I had and it encouraged such a love of reading. And when I was at my grandmother's house, all the time Mother was working at the Boston store, I'd gone for 3 years to a St. Joseph parochial school, which was right across the corner, right across the street from the Catholic Church, and it was a 2-room school. So you had 8 grades in 2 rooms, and so you assimilated almost by osmosis all this other education you see from the other classes. So when that school had to close due to depression, I was pretty far advanced. So through the years until I finished 8th grade, I skipped 2 grades. So that's why which I regret terribly, because I know nothing about math, and I concentrated on the things that I really enjoyed, which were history and English and reading. And so as I say, that's why I had a very interesting background, even though, and having never known a father, I didn't really know what I had missed. I had a very wonderful grandfather, but who was ill for most of my knowledgeable years, anyway, of my grandfather, and but a wonderful grandmother, and aunts, and an uncle with, who was a lawyer there, J. was Walker, and just a delightful raconteur. I had a very interesting family, and I really enjoyed it. And my aunt was a beautiful musician, piano, and we would she'd put on concerts for the family too, so in the parlor, we had a big parlor.
How did you celebrate holidays?
Minimally. My grandmother always believed in big dinners, but I never had a Christmas tree at my grandmother's house, except for the ones that, when my mother and I were living there, we would, she would get a little tree and put up in our bedroom. But it was always smelled so good, and it was so pretty and everything. And I've still got some of the, but I put out every year, ornaments that were on that tree, on those trees. And then she would put up a wreath on the door. But my grandmother, she was very generous with gifts and things, but she just didn't want to be bothered with trees and things. But my Aunt Jane Walker, Mrs. J. was Walker, who lived a block up the street in this big Victorian home that my grandfather had built for him when they were married. She had a big fireplace, and she always had a big tree, and they would, she had the 3 sons, and she would, who were much, much older than I, and had always left home really at that point. But they would bring me up there on Christmas Eve and open the doors and for me to see that tree. So, and always beautifully decorated. She used to entertain a lot at Christmas time, and so Christmas was a very mysterious, special kind of time growing up, but it wasn't like you all have it today, or like we had it for the children.
Where did you attend grade school?
At the St. Joseph's Parochial School, and